My name is Sophie Callahan, and I'm 31 years old. 6 years ago, my father called me 4 days before Christmas and said the words that ended my old life. Don't come home this year, sweetheart. Danielle doesn't want you there. No warning. No apology. Just a door closing on 29 years of trying to be enough. I spent that Christmas alone in a diner in Seattle, watching families in ugly sweaters pass gravy boats while I picked at a plate of eggs at 10 o'clock at night. I had no idea that a stranger 2 booths away would become the mother I never had. I had no idea that 6 years later, she'd be introduced as the mother of the bride at my wedding, while my biological parents stood in the back of the room, watching everything they threw away belong to someone else. Before I tell you what happened, take a second and hit that like button, but only if this story means something to you. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the phone call that split my life into before and after. I remember the exact chair I was sitting in. A folding chair at my kitchen table, because I hadn't bought real furniture yet. I was 25, 4 months into my first apartment that didn't have a roommate's name on the lease, and I was wrapping presents for my family when my phone rang. Dad's name on the screen. I smiled before I even answered, because some part of me still believed, every single time, that this call would be different. Hey, Dad. I had the scissors in one hand, wrapping paper curling off the roll. Hey, kiddo. His voice had that careful, rehearsed quality, like he'd practiced this in the car. Listen, I need to talk to you about Christmas. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. Okay. Danielle's really stressed with the wedding planning, and your mother thinks it might be best if, he paused, and I heard him swallow, if you sat this one out. Don't come home this year, sweetheart. Danielle doesn't want you there. I actually laughed. A short, disbelieving sound, because for a second I thought it was a joke, some strange lead-up to a punchline that never came. What do you mean, she doesn't want me there? It's Christmas. It's not her house. You know how you two are, he said, like that explained anything. You ask her things. You bring up old stuff. She just wants a peaceful holiday before the wedding. What old stuff, Dad? I asked her one question at Thanksgiving about why I wasn't in the engagement photos. That's not drama. That's a question. See, this is exactly it. His voice hardened, the way it always did right before he checked out of a conversation entirely. You always make everything harder than it needs to be. I stood there gripping the phone, wrapping paper crumpled in my other fist, and understood with a clarity that felt like falling. 25 years old, and my own father was telling me I wasn't welcome at Christmas because I'd once asked to be included in a photo. I already bought a plane ticket home, I said quietly. Then you'll have to change it. This isn't up for discussion, sophomore. Your mother's made up her mind. The line went dead before I could say anything else. And I sat there in my folding chair, surrounded by half-wrapped gifts for people who had just told me, without a shred of hesitation, that I didn't belong at their table. I called back twice. Both times it went straight to voicemail, which told me everything I needed to know about how prepared he'd been for this conversation. He hadn't called on impulse. He'd waited until he had a script, until my mother had already decided the outcome, and then he'd delivered the news like a man reading terms and conditions he didn't necessarily agree with but wasn't willing to argue against either. That, somehow, hurt worse than the words themselves. It wasn't cruelty. It was compliance. And compliance from your own father is its own particular kind of loneliness. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my lap, running the math on 25 years the way you'd run your tongue over a chipped tooth, checking to see if it still hurt the same way it had the last time. It did. It always did. The pattern. I wish I could tell you that call came out of nowhere. But as I sat there staring at a roll of wrapping paper, the memories came back in a slideshow of quiet erasures I'd spent years explaining away. My 8th grade graduation. I'd made honor roll every semester that year, and the ceremony fell on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother promised she'd be there. That morning, Danielle, 2 years older and perpetually in some minor crisis, had a meltdown over a boy who hadn't texted her back. My mother spent the entire day on the phone with her instead, and showed up to my graduation 40 minutes late, sliding into a folding chair just as they called my name. "Don't be so sensitive, Sophie," she told me afterward. "Your sister needed me. You understand." Then there was my 16th birthday, the one I'd been planning for months, a sleepover with my 3 closest friends, the good cake from the bakery downtown, a whole day mapped out in my head. Danielle got dumped by her boyfriend of 6 weeks the night before. My party was quietly cancelled so the household could revolve around consoling her. "We'll do something small for you next weekend," my mother said. We never did. College acceptance letters came the same week for both of us. Danielle got into her top choice, and I got into mine, a state school 3 hours away with a partial scholarship I was proud of. My parents threw Danielle a party with a banner and a cake shaped like her school's mascot. For me, my mother said, "We'll celebrate when you actually graduate. Getting in isn't the hard part." I graduated 4 years later, top of my class in graphic design, and they didn't come to that either. Danielle had a work conference. "You understand, sweetheart. It's a big opportunity for her." I learned early that complaining only sharpened the knife. Stop making everything about you. Why can't you just be happy for your sister? So I got quieter. I got smaller. I told myself that if I just asked for less, wanted less, needed less, eventually there'd be room left over for me. I was 25 years old sitting in a mostly empty apartment with a plane ticket I couldn't use, and I finally understood the truth I'd been outrunning my whole life. There was no version of small enough. There never had been. I called my mother that night, some last flicker of hope pushing me to try one more time. She answered on the second ring, brisk, like she'd been expecting the call and had already decided how it would go. "Mom, did Dad tell you what he said to me?" "He told you what we agreed on, yes." "You don't think I should be at Christmas? With my own family?" A pause, the sound of a television murmuring in the background. Danielle asked for a calm holiday before her wedding. Is that so much to give her? What about what I need? Don't do this, Sophie. Don't make her wedding season about your feelings. Something in my chest went very still, very quiet. Not angry. Just empty, the way a room feels after the furniture's been carried out. "Okay, Mom," I said, and I hung up, and she didn't call back. Neither of them did. Not that night, not the next day, not once over the 2 weeks of Christmas that followed. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I wasn't a difficult child. I wasn't the kid who slammed doors or skipped school or gave my parents grief for the sport of it. I got good grades. I babysat the neighbors' kids for extra cash. I called my mother every Sunday even during the years she didn't seem particularly interested in the call. I did everything right, by every measure anyone ever gave me, and it never once bought me the thing I actually wanted, which was simply to matter as much as my sister did. I think that's the part people miss when they hear stories like mine. It was never about being good enough. There was no such thing as good enough. There was only ever Danielle, and then whatever was left over. Christmas alone. Christmas Eve arrived gray and wet, the kind of Seattle rain that doesn't fall so much as hang in the air. I woke up to the sound of my upstairs neighbor's kids running across the floor, laughing at something, and I lay there in bed listening to a happiness that wasn't mine. I made coffee. I didn't check my phone until noon, and when I finally did, there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, not even a group message with a photo. Against my better judgment, I opened Instagram, and there it was, Danielle's post, the whole family gathered around the dinner table, my parents flanking her and her fiancé, a professionally decorated tree glowing in the background. The caption read, "Grateful for the people who truly show up for me." I counted the place settings. For adults, one empty chair pushed against the wall, clearly not set for anyone. They hadn't just left me out. They'd tidied up the evidence that I was ever supposed to be there at all. I closed the app and sat with that for a long time. Then I did something that surprised even me. I grabbed my coat. I found a diner 3 blocks from my apartment, one of those all-night places with vinyl booths and a neon sign that stayed lit through every holiday nobody else worked. It was almost empty, a couple of guys off a night shift, an elderly man reading a paperback, and in the corner booth, a family that took up too much space in the best possible way. An older woman with silver hair pulled back loosely, a man beside her who kept making everyone laugh, a younger couple, and a boy about 10 who was narrating his pancakes to anyone who'd listen. I sat 2 booths down and ordered eggs I didn't want. I made it through maybe 6 bites before the tears came, quiet and humiliating, the kind you try to disguise as something else. I pressed my napkin to my eyes and stared hard out the rain-streaked window. "Honey?" A woman's voice, warm, unhurried. I looked up and the silver-haired woman from the corner booth was standing at the end of my table, studying me the way you'd study something you were worried might be hurt. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just tired." She raised one eyebrow, gentle, unconvinced. "Tired doesn't usually look like that." She glanced back at her table, then at me. "Nobody should eat Christmas Eve dinner alone. Come sit with us." I shook my head, already retreating into my smallest self. "Oh, no, I couldn't. I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," she said. "I'm asking." "There's a difference." She held out her hand. "I'm Diane." "Sophie," I said, and something about her steadiness made the rest come out before I could stop it. "My family told me not to come home this year." Diane's face didn't do the thing most people's faces do, the flinch, the pity, the awkward pivot. She just nodded slowly, like she'd heard some version of this before and knew exactly what it cost. "Well," she said. "Ours has plenty of room." And she reached out and simply took my hand, the way you'd take the hand of someone about to step off a curb, and led me to their table like it had already been decided. The Hendersons. They made space for me the way you'd make space for someone who'd always been coming. Diane's husband, Frank, scooted his chair over without a word. Their son, Marcus, slid a plate toward me before I'd even sat down. "Diane, we haven't ordered dessert yet," Frank said, "and this young woman needs pie whether she wants it or not." "I don't even know you," I said, half laughing despite myself. "Give it 20 minutes, Marcus said. "You will." Over the next hour I learned their names, their small rituals, the shorthand of a family that actually liked each other. Frank had been a high school shop teacher for 30 years and told jokes so bad they looped back around to funny. Diane, it turned out, had spent 3 decades as a family law attorney before retiring, and there was something in the careful, unhurried way she asked questions that told you she'd spent a career learning how to really listen. Their older son and his wife were visiting from Portland with their 10-year-old, who informed me with total confidence that pancakes were basically a food group. Marcus, their younger son, was around my age, quiet in a way that wasn't shy so much as attentive, the kind of person who noticed when your glass was empty before you did. Diane didn't push, but somewhere between the eggs and the pie, she asked, gently, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" So I did. The phone call. "Don't come home. Danielle doesn't want you there." The years of birthdays cancelled, graduations skipped, the small quiet math of always finishing second in a family of 4. When I finished, Diane reached over and put her hand flat on the table near mine, not quite touching. "Sophie, I spent 30 years watching families do this to each other. And I can tell you something I learned early, the people who call you dramatic are almost always the ones creating the drama. They just need somewhere to put it." I didn't have words for what that did to me. Nobody had ever said it out loud, and definitely nobody had ever said it like it was simply, obviously true. When the check came, Frank waved off my card before I'd even reached for my wallet. "Our treat," he said. "Consider it a Christmas tradition. We always feed strays." He winked so I'd know he meant it kindly. As we bundled into coats by the door, Diane pressed a card into my hand, cream-colored, her name in small, elegant type, a phone number beneath it. "Call me," she said. "I mean that." Doesn't have to be about anything. Frank added that Sunday dinners happened at their place every week, 6 o'clock, and I was welcome any time I wanted a seat. I stood there in the rain-streaked doorway holding an invitation from people who'd known me for 90 minutes, feeling something I couldn't yet name, but that I'd later understand was the first real flicker of belonging I'd felt in years. Walking home through the rain that night, I kept turning the card over in my coat pocket, running my thumb along the raised edge of Diane's name, half convinced I'd imagined the whole evening. It felt too easy, too generous, to be real, the idea that a family could simply decide to let you in, no application process, no probation, no conditions attached. My whole life had trained me to expect love to be a transaction, something you earned in small installments and could lose all at once. I didn't yet have the language for what had actually happened in that diner. I only knew that for the first time in longer than I could remember, I hadn't spent an entire dinner performing. I had just been myself, tear-streaked and unimpressive, and somehow that had been enough. Sunday dinners. I didn't call for 3 weeks. It felt too forward, too much like inviting myself into a life that wasn't mine to enter. But Diane called me first, just to check in, and by the second week of January I finally worked up the nerve to knock on the Hendersons' door. Their house was a low, sprawling rambler with a porch light that stayed on and a doormat that actually said welcome, which felt almost too on the nose. Diane opened the door before I'd finished knocking, like she'd been watching for me. "There you are," she said, pulling me into a hug like it was the most unremarkable thing in the world. "We saved you a seat." That was the first of what became, over the following year, nearly 50 Sunday dinners. Frank taught me to play cribbage, badly, because he refused to explain the rules twice. Diane showed me her biscuit recipe, guarding the one secret ingredient like state property. Their grandson started calling me Aunt Sophie without anyone telling him to, correcting himself once, embarrassed, and then never correcting himself again because nobody told him it was wrong. And Marcus and I became something neither of us announced out loud for a long time. It started as easy friendship, texting about nothing at midnight, arguing about which diner made better pie, the two of us instinctively sitting next to each other at every dinner without either of us arranging it. It grew so slowly that by the time we admitted it to each other, it felt less like a beginning and more like acknowledging something that had already been true for months. I didn't hear one word from my biological family that entire year. Not a birthday text, not a Christmas card, nothing. And somewhere in the middle of that year, I noticed I'd stopped waiting for it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing for love. I wasn't shrinking myself down to a size someone else found acceptable. I was just being loved, without conditions, without a scoreboard, and it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 25 years. One evening in early spring, Diane and I sat on her back porch while the men argued about a baseball game inside. The garden was just starting to green up, and she asked, quietly, "Have you thought about reaching out to them?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly at 2 in the morning. Then I remember there's nothing left to say. They know what they did. They just don't think it was wrong." She nodded, no judgment in it. That's the hardest kind of closure to accept, the kind where nobody's sorry. She was quiet for a moment, watching a bird fight over the feeder. In my career, I helped a lot of people find legal standing for the families they built, not just the ones they were born into. There are ways to make a bond like that official, if a person ever wants that. I didn't fully understand what she meant that day. But the words settled into me anyway, patient, waiting for the moment I'd be ready to hear them properly. That spring, and through the summer that followed, Sunday dinners became the fixed point around which the rest of my week organized itself. I stopped counting the weeks since I'd last heard from my mother, because I noticed, almost without meaning to, that I'd stopped waiting for the phone to ring. Frank taught his grandson and me to fish off the dock at the lake house they rented every August, and I caught exactly nothing 3 summers running, and nobody ever once made me feel small about it. Diane started leaving a mug in the cupboard that everyone quietly understood was mine. Small things. The kind of things you don't notice are rebuilding you until you look up one day and realize the structure's already standing. The proposal. It happened so gradually that by the time Marcus and I called it what it was, It felt less like a beginning and more like catching up to something that had already been true. 2 years after that Christmas Eve, he asked me to dinner at the same diner where we'd met. "This feels a little on the nose," I said, sliding into our old booth. "That's the point," he said, and I noticed his hands were unsteady around his coffee mug in a way they never usually were. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for months, so I'm just going to say it badly." He took a breath. "I want to choose you, on purpose, every single day, for the rest of my life." My heart stopped somewhere between my ribs. "I know what your family did to you," he said, steady despite the nerves. "I know some part of you is always braced for people to leave. But I'm not going anywhere. I never was." He reached into his jacket and produced a small box, and asked me to marry him right there in the booth where a stranger's mother had once decided I was worth feeding. I said yes before he'd even finished the question. The diner, half full on a Tuesday night, broke into applause I hadn't even noticed we had an audience for. And in the corner booth, the same one, always the same one, sat Diane and Frank, champagne glasses already poured, beaming like they'd known all along exactly how the story was going to go. Mom couldn't resist planning ahead, Marcus laughed, and I realized, with a small jolt, that I was about to officially become a Henderson. The adoption. Wedding planning began almost immediately, and with it came a question that kept me up more nights than any seating chart or flower order ever could. Every invitation template had a line for parents of the bride. And I had no idea what I was supposed to put there. Richard and Linda Callahan hadn't spoken to me in going on 3 years by that point. No birthday texts, no acknowledgement I existed. I couldn't put their names on an invitation to celebrate a life they'd worked so hard to exclude themselves from. But leaving the line blank felt like admitting a wound out loud to 200 wedding guests. I was pacing Diane's living room one evening, turning the invitation proof over and over in my hands, when she found me. "Do you remember what I mentioned once, about legal recognition for chosen family?" I nodded slowly. "You said the law can make a bond real, not just the one you're born into." "Adult adoption," she said gently. "It's a legal process. A consenting adult can be formally adopted by another family. New birth certificate, new legal next of kin, a real parent-child relationship recognized by the state, not just by feeling." She paused. "I've walked clients through it before. If you ever wanted that." My chest went tight. "Would you and Frank ever consider?" She pulled me into her arms before I could finish the sentence. "We've considered you our daughter since the second bite of pie that Christmas Eve," she said. "We were only ever waiting for you to be ready to say it out loud." The process took 4 months, paperwork, a short hearing in front of a family court judge, filings that felt more ceremonial than bureaucratic with Diane guiding every step. When the judge signed the final order, I legally became Sophie Henderson. New documents, new legal parents, a family on paper that had already been a family in every way that mattered for 2 years. We sent out invitations with the line I'd agonized over finally filled in with pride: parents of the bride, Frank and Diane Henderson. Discovery. I should have known my biological family would find out eventually. 3 months before the wedding, my phone lit up with a text from Danielle, the first message from her in nearly 3 years. "Did you know Sophie is getting married?" She'd apparently posted somewhere, tagging our mutual cousins before even reaching out to me directly. I read it once, felt nothing but a distant kind of tiredness, and didn't respond. A week later my mother called 4 times in a single afternoon. I let all 4 go to voicemail. Then came the text, "Why didn't you tell us? We are still your family. Call me back right now." I read it twice and deleted it. 3 years of silence, 3 years of being erased from every holiday photo and family group chat, and now, suddenly, urgently, they remembered they had a second daughter. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. I'd moved past anger a long time before that. I was just tired in the specific way you get tired of explaining yourself to people who never plan to listen. Marcus found me staring at my phone that evening. "Everything okay?" "They found out about the wedding." "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I said. I don't owe them an invitation. I don't owe them an explanation. I don't owe them anything at all. He nodded and didn't push, and we both understood, without saying it, that this wasn't over. The Callahans had never once, in my entire life, accepted being ignored. The confrontation. She showed up at my apartment on a Wednesday afternoon while I was reviewing wedding seating charts at my kitchen table. I opened the door without checking the peephole, a mistake I never made again after that day. Sophie. My mother stood in the hallway, older than I remembered her, grayer, but her eyes carried the same disappointed weight I'd spent 30 years trying to erase from every corner of myself. Mom. What are you doing here? What am I doing here? She pushed past me into the apartment uninvited. You're getting married and I had to find out from your cousin's Facebook comment. We haven't spoken in 3 years. And whose fault is that? I closed the door slowly, counted to 5 before I answered. Yours. You told me not to come home. That was the beginning, not me. That was one Christmas. You're still punishing us for one Christmas? It wasn't one Christmas, I said, calm in a way that surprised even me. It was 29 years of one Christmas, over and over, with different names on the invitation. Her eyes swept the apartment, landing on the photos on my bookshelf, me and Marcus at the coast, me and Diane elbow-deep in flour making biscuits, the whole Henderson family crowded into a Christmas photo with me dead center. Who are these people? My family. I am your family. You were, I said, holding her gaze. You chose not to be. Remember? Danielle doesn't want drama. That's what Dad said. That's what you agreed to. That was years ago. And in those years you never called. Never texted. Never once acknowledged I existed. So no, Mom. You don't get to show up now and act like there's a seat waiting for you. I want to be invited to the wedding. No. Her mouth fell open. Excuse me? You don't get to erase someone and then demand a seat at their table when it's convenient for you. I walked to the door and opened it, holding it steady. I think you should go. She stood in the doorway a moment longer, and for one strange second I thought she might actually apologize, that something in her expression was cracking open the way I'd waited half a lifetime for it to crack. Instead she straightened her coat and said, "You'll regret this. Weddings are for family." I know, I said. That's why mine will be full of it. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, deliberately, the way you close a chapter you've finally finished reading, and I stood there with my hand still on the knob for a long moment, waiting to feel something enormous. Instead I felt strangely light, like I'd set down a suitcase I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight at all. The wedding morning. The wedding day arrived clear and gold, an October morning in the Columbia Valley with rows of vineyards stretching gently toward the hills. We'd chosen an outdoor ceremony and a reception inside a converted stone winery, everything dressed in white dahlias and soft green. In the bridal suite, Diane adjusted my veil while I stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror was steadier, quieter in her certainty, than the 25-year-old who'd once believed she wasn't worth loving. You look beautiful, Diane said softly. I picked up a copy of the wedding program from the vanity, reading the line I'd once thought I'd never get to write. Parents of the bride, Frank and Diane Henderson. Underneath, in smaller type, the family who chose her. Are you nervous? Diane asked. Not about marrying Marcus, I said. A little about what might happen today. I'd quietly arranged for security at the entrance, a precaution I hoped I wouldn't need, after my mother's visit to my apartment.
Diane put her hands on my shoulders. Whatever happens today, you have a family that chose you, and we will keep choosing you. Never forget that. I hugged her tightly. I love you, Mom. It was the first time I'd ever called her that out loud, and the word came out of me easily, like it had simply been waiting its turn. Her eyes glistened. I love you too, sweetheart. My daughter. Through the window I could see guests arriving, Marcus already waiting at the far end of the aisle in a gray suit, looking nervous and handsome and entirely certain. It was time. The ceremony. The ceremony was everything I hadn't let myself dream about for most of my life. Frank walked me down the aisle, steady, visibly proud, his hand tucked over mine like he was holding something precious. Marcus and I had written our own vows, and by the time we reached the middle of them, half the guests were openly crying and the other half were pretending they weren't. When Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger and the officiant pronounced us married, something settled into place in my chest, quiet and permanent, like the final piece of a puzzle I'd spent decades trying to force into the wrong shape. The reception was already loud with music and laughter when a security guard found me near the edge of the dance floor. "Mrs. Henderson," he said quietly, "there are 2 people at the entrance claiming to be your parents. I've been waiting for this all day." Some part of me almost relieved it had finally arrived. Marcus appeared at my elbow. "What's going on?" "My biological parents are here." His jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." "No," I said, taking his hand. "This is mine to handle." I could have had them turned away at the door. I could have avoided the whole thing entirely and let the day stay untouched. But something in me wanted them to see it, the family that had shown up when theirs walked away, the life I'd built without their permission or their help. "Let them in," I told the guard. "But seat them at the back. Don't let them near the head table." The reveal. The MC stepped up to the microphone just as the toasts were about to begin, and the room quieted the way rooms do when they sense something is coming. My mother was near the back, craning her neck, clearly bracing herself to be recognized, to finally claim the seat she believed was rightfully hers. "Before we continue," the MC said, "I'd like to introduce 2 very special people. Please join me in welcoming the parents of the bride, Frank and Diane Henderson." The room erupted into applause. Frank and Diane stood from the head table, beaming, waving to 200 guests who cheered like this was exactly as it should be. I watched my mother's face from across the room in something like slow motion, the confusion arriving first, then the disbelief, then the moment the meaning of those words finally landed. She grabbed my father's arm. "What did he just say?" He looked stunned, speechless, while around them guests kept clapping, utterly unaware that the older couple standing near the back had any connection to the bride at all. To everyone else in that room, Frank and Diane Henderson were simply, uncomplicatedly my parents, and the truth settled over my mother like cold water. She had been replaced completely, legally, publicly, and every single person in that room understood it except her. She pushed through the crowd toward me before I could stop her, her face flushed, eyes wide. "What is going on? Who are those people?" "My legal parents," I said steady. "I was adopted 2 years ago." "You what? You can't just replace us." "I didn't replace you," I said. "You left first. We never abandoned you. You told me not to come home. You chose Danielle. Every single time for 29 years. Guests nearby had noticed the confrontation now, conversations dying around us. "That's not fair," she started. "Fair," I repeated, and I didn't raise my voice because I didn't need to. I spent 29 years trying to earn a place in this family. I got a Christmas alone in a diner and 3 years of silence for my trouble. "I'm still your mother." "Not legally," I said, holding up my hand, both rings catching the light. "Not emotionally either. Not anymore." She stared at me like she was looking at a stranger. Maybe she was. The daughter who never fought back had finally stopped shrinking. And then, for the first time in my entire life, my father spoke first. "Sophie." His voice cracked. I'm sorry." I turned to actually look at him. He'd aged more than 3 years should account for. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen. "I should have done better," he said. "I was a coward. I saw how they treated you and I just stood there and let it happen." Something in my chest cracked open. Not healing exactly. Just recognition of an old wound finally being named. "I know, Dad. I'm so sorry," he said again, tears running freely now. "I know you are," I said gently. "But sorry doesn't undo the years you stood by and let it happen. Doesn't give me my childhood back. It doesn't make this okay." "I know it doesn't," he said, nodding, wiping his face. Diane appeared quietly at my shoulder, her hand resting on my arm, not saying a word, just letting me know I wasn't standing there alone. My mother's eyes flicked to her with open hostility. "You," she said. "You're the one who stole my daughter." "I didn't steal anything, Mrs. Callahan," Diane said, calm and unbothered. Then what do you call this? Frank stepped forward then, quiet as always, but with something steady in his voice that silenced the small crowd around us. I think it's time you folks left. Who are you to tell us anything? I'm her father, Frank said. Legally, and in every way that's ever mattered. 6 years ago this young woman was sitting alone in a diner on Christmas Eve because her own family told her she wasn't welcome. My wife invited her to sit with us. That's all it took. We didn't steal your daughter. You gave her away. We just picked up what you threw out. He turned toward the small crowd that had gathered. Please escort them out. What I wanted them to know. Before security could reach them, I held up a hand. Wait. Everyone froze. My mother looked at me with something like hope flickering across her face, like maybe I was about to relent. I walked toward them, stopping an arm's length away. I don't hate you, I said, and whatever she'd braced herself to hear, that clearly wasn't it. I've made peace with who you are. You're not villains. You're just people who couldn't love me the way I needed. People who chose comfort over fairness over and over, until there was nothing left to choose me at all. Robert was crying harder now. My mother's face had gone completely still. But I've also made peace with who I am, I said. And who I am is someone who deserves to be chosen. Not as a backup. Not as an afterthought. Chosen first. I looked between them. You didn't choose me. They did. I gestured toward Frank and Diane. And I choose them. Nobody in that room moved. I'm not erasing you from my life, I said quietly. I'm just not giving you a seat at my table anymore. That's not revenge. That's just the natural consequence of your own choices. I nodded to the security guard. Goodbye, Mom. Dad.
After. The rest of the wedding unfolded exactly the way I'd hoped it would. We danced until my feet ached. We cut the cake while 200 people cheered. For a few hours I let myself forget the confrontation entirely and simply be happy. By the next morning my phone had filled with messages from cousins and aunts I hadn't heard from in years, all of them suddenly very invested in my behavior. How could you humiliate your mother like that? Family is family no matter what. I deleted them without answering. But one message stopped me. My Aunt Patricia, my father's younger sister, someone I'd always liked from a careful distance. I heard what happened, it read. I want you to know I'm proud of you. I always knew how they treated you, and I tried to say something once and your mother didn't speak to me for a year over it. You deserved better. You always did. I read it twice, I stinging, and wrote back, thank you. That means more than you know. 2 weeks later a handwritten letter arrived from Danielle, her looping handwriting exactly the same as it had been on every obligatory birthday card she'd ever sent me. I almost threw it away unopened. Instead I sat down and read it. It was mostly what I expected. Mom is devastated, Dad hasn't been the same, family is complicated, maybe when you have kids you'll understand. I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer, and I didn't answer it, because I finally understood something I hadn't at 25. It wasn't my job to make her understand. It never had been. That evening I blocked every number and account connected to the Callahan name. Not out of anger. Out of peace. Marcus found me on the balcony of our hotel room that night, the vineyard still lit up gold from the reception lights below. You okay? He asked, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders.
Yeah, I said and meant it. I really am. Do you think about them? Your parents. Danielle. I considered the question honestly instead of giving him the easy answer. Sometimes. Usually late at night when I can't sleep. I wonder if they've changed at all, if any of it ever actually landed. I shook my head slowly. I don't think people change in the ways that matter most. Not without wanting to first. Does that make you sad? I thought about it, watching the last of the reception lights flicker off one by one in the distance. It used to, I said. I don't have room for that kind of sad anymore. My life is too full for it now. He kissed the top of my head, and we stood there a while longer, not needing to say anything else. 1 year later. A year after the wedding, Marcus and I bought a small house 20 minutes from Frank and Diane, close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough for our own life. I'd been promoted to art director at the design firm I'd been freelancing for. Marcus was thriving at his architecture practice. And I was pregnant. Diane cried when we told her. Frank tried not to and failed completely. One afternoon while we painted the nursery a soft sage green, she asked gently if we'd thought about names. Emily, I said. If it's a girl. Emily Grace Henderson. Diane's eyes welled up instantly. That's beautiful. The Henderson part isn't negotiable, I said. I want her to carry the name of the family that chose her mother. She pulled me into a hug. When I saw you sitting alone in that diner, she said, I had no idea we'd end up here. I just saw somebody who needed a little kindness. You saved my life that night, I told her. No, sweetheart, she said, pulling back to look at me. You saved yourself. We just showed you it was possible. Full circle. 6 years to the day after I sat alone in that diner. I sat at the head of a very different table. The Henderson house was loud in the best possible way. My daughter, Emily, 6 months old, being passed lap to lap like a small drooling treasure. Frank was sneaking a second slice of pie when he thought nobody was watching. Diane was watching. Before dinner, Diane raised her glass and asked me to say a few words. I stood, Emily against my shoulder, and looked around at the family I'd found, the family that had found me first. 6 years ago tonight, I said. I was sitting alone at a diner, wondering if I'd ever really belong anywhere. I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was too much, too difficult, too dramatic. I felt Marcus's hand find mine under the table. Then a woman I'd never met walked over to my booth and told me nobody should eat alone on Christmas Eve. And everything after that changed. Frank wiped his eyes. Diane was already crying. So here's my toast, I said, raising my glass. To family. Not the one we're born into. The one we build. The one we choose and the one that chooses us back. To family, they echoed. Glasses clinked. Emily gurgled softly against my shoulder, and I looked around the table at my people, and felt, completely and without condition, that I belonged. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the kids had fallen asleep in a tangle on the living room floor, Marcus and I sat out on the back porch with Emily between us, watching the stars come out one at a time over Frank's garden. The November air was sharp, but we were wrapped in the same old blanket we'd used every year since that first Christmas. Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if that call had gone differently? Marcus asked. If they'd just let you come home that year? I thought about it for a long moment, the way you turn over a stone you've picked up 100 times before. I used to wonder that all the time, I admitted. Now I think the call had to happen exactly the way it did. If they'd let me in that Christmas, I don't think I ever would have walked into that diner. I would have kept waiting for scraps my whole life and called it enough. I looked down at Emily, her small fist curled against her cheek, her breathing slow and even. I'll never make her earn this, I whispered, more to her than to him. She'll never have to wonder if she's wanted. She'll just know. Marcus wrapped his arm tighter around both of us. I'm glad you found your way to that diner. Me too, I said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, when I thought about the family I came from, I didn't feel the old ache. I just felt grateful I hadn't stayed there waiting. The message. If you're watching this and you've ever been the one blamed for the drama simply because you asked to be treated fairly, I want you to hear something clearly. It's not you. It never was. You deserve to be chosen. Not as a backup, not as the acceptable sacrifice when someone else's comfort is on the line. Chosen first. Chosen fully. Chosen without conditions attached. Family isn't blood. It isn't obligation. It isn't people who share your last name but treat you like an inconvenience. Family is the people who show up. The people who notice you crying alone in a corner booth and simply make room. The people who open their Sunday dinners and eventually their hearts, and eventually the legal paperwork to make you permanently, officially, undeniably theirs. I spent 29 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. And then I spent 6 years learning what love actually looks like when it isn't rationed. If the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally keep proving again and again that you'll always come last, you have every right to build something new. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to be happy. That isn't revenge. That isn't drama. That's just choosing a life without people who never deserved a seat at your table in the first place. I know some of you watching this are still sitting at your own kitchen tables tonight, replaying a phone call or a text message or a look across a dinner table, wondering if you imagine the whole thing, wondering if maybe you really are too sensitive, too much, too dramatic for simply wanting to be treated the same as everyone else in the room. You didn't imagine it. And you're not too much. You're asking for the bare minimum, and somewhere along the way someone convinced you that the bare minimum was too big an ask. It isn't. It never was. Setting a boundary with people who share your blood is one of the loneliest, hardest things you'll ever do. And nobody claps for you the way they clap for a wedding toast. There's no music, no applause, no room full of people cheering you on when you finally stop answering the phone. Sometimes it's just you, alone in an apartment, making a quiet decision that nobody else will ever fully understand. But I promise you, on the other side of that decision, there is room to build something real. There is room for people who will actually show up. I found mine in a diner booth on the loneliest night of my life. And I'm telling you, wherever yours is waiting, it's out there too.
I found my people. I hope, with everything in me, that you find yours too. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to set a boundary with your own family? I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, check the description below. Until next time, remember, you deserve to be chosen.